Yeah, as I said, do feel free to pop questions along the way into the Q&A. I always like to hear from people who have also traveled to these destinations because I'm always curious to hear what other people's experiences were. But we will get started now. And the first thing I always like to do is to put our destination on the map so that you have a rough idea of what we're talking about here. So here, just so you can see where Kuala Lumpur is, it's usually known shorthand as KL, which makes it easier to say. And it's down here. Malaysia is a country split into two. Half of it is on the island of Borneo, and half of it is here on the peninsula. That goes all the way down and ends in the city of Singapore. Malaysia has about maybe 28, 30 million people right now, and KL is the capital. The population of the country is roughly half Malay and about a quarter Chinese, and it also has a very large Indian population. Most of the population of the country is, in fact, on the peninsula here and tends to be concentrated on the coast as opposed to the interior. And as you can imagine, given the geography, it is very tropical, similar to the kind of climate that you would see in Indonesia or Thailand and so forth. It is a former British colony. It became independent in 1957 as the Federation of Malaya, and then a few other areas joined it later in the early 1960s, and they changed the name to Malaysia. At the time, it included Singapore, which is an island just at the very tip of the Malay Peninsula. But in 1965, Singapore left the Confederation and became an independent city-state in 1965, and it remains that today. The language in Malaysia is Malay, as you might guess, but English is widely spoken, which makes it a very good place for tourists to travel because English tends to be the lingua franca there because so many other languages are spoken, mostly Asian languages, but you'll see as we go through the presentation that there's a wide variety of ethnic groups. It really is a melting pot of East Asia. It has a rapidly developing economy, although that's taken a hit as for the rest of the world during COVID. But they have abundant natural resources in Malaysia. It was originally, for centuries, it was part of the spice route. And also there are a number of important metals there, like tin. There's also oil and palm oil for fuel and oil for cooking, and food production. Rubber is something that's been produced there for a very long time, and increasingly in recent decades, tourism, particularly in certain areas. The main tourist areas outside of Kuala Lumpur are Penang and Malacca, which are way up here and way down here. And of course, Singapore, which although it's a separate nation, it is very easy to get to. It's only 2 hours by plane from KL, so people often combine those in trips. This was a trip we did a few years ago, and this is the guest house we stayed in. I do have to say that I found Kuala Lumpur is, I think, a really good entry-level city. If you've never traveled in Asia before and are a little intimidated by going to a place that is so overwhelming for, most Asian cities are really big, really busy, very crowded. I actually found Kuala Lumpur a relatively easy city to get around. The language is part of that because English is spoken widely enough. And it's a manageable sized city. A lot of the things that you might want to see as a tourist are actually within a relatively small area. You can even walk or take public transit to a lot of the things that you would like to see. And there are some nice excursions that you can take very easily outside of the city. The federal district of Kuala Lumpur has about 2 million people in the city itself, but the area around it is considerably larger. There's about 7 million. It's a very big city. But it was started it's a pretty old city for this area. It was settled in the 1850s at the very muddy confluence of two rivers, the Klang River and the Gombak River. And it really got its start because of a rush of tin mining, kind of like the gold rush in California. Tin mining was started there. It was just, the tin ore was discovered. And so huge numbers of people came from within the country and without to this otherwise backwater that gradually grew and grew and grew and became the capital of the country about 50 years later in 1896. This was the very comfy little guest house that we stayed in. It's a pretty inexpensive city if you don't stay in really expensive international style hotels. There are lots of little guest houses that are quite comfortable, very safe. It is a very safe city to walk around as a tourist, other than the normal concerns about pickpocketing and things. It's generally, in terms of violent crime, it's really not a problem. So it's an enjoyable city to visit in that sense. This was the terrace behind our guest house, and inside, very comfortable. Malaysia was occupied by the Japanese during World War II. So there's always been a certain amount of ethnic conflict and strife because of all these different ethnic groups and nationalities that meet in this part of the world. There were major race riots, in fact, in the late 1960s between the Malay population and the Chinese immigrant population that lived there, and actually a couple hundred people died in that. That has pretty much calmed down in the decades since then. Here was our breakfast room. Nowadays, it's a big center for banking and finance. It's the major tourist entry point for the city. There's huge amounts of retail and cultural museums and things, which I will show you. And it, of course, is a major center for government. Although at the end of the program, I'm going to show you where they are moving a lot of that to a completely brand new government center that's about, maybe 45 minutes away. A very modern city that's being created right out of the jungle. And that started about 20 years ago. It's officially a Muslim country, although freedom of religion is legally protected. About 60% of the population is Muslim. There's probably 20% who are Buddhists, but there are Hindus, there are Christians, there are Taoists, there are animists. And of course, that comes from the great mix of ethnicities, bringing their various faiths from the countries that they originally come from. Because, partly because it's a Muslim country, and partly just because it's Asia, you will usually find that if you go into a building, you will be expected to take off your shoes, not just in a mosque, which is common in other Muslim countries, but in pretty much any private home that you go into, you would take off your shoes. And that's true in a lot of the hotels, certainly the small ones. It's very hot, it's very humid, pretty much year round, because it's very close to the equator. But one thing that's popular both for locals and tourists alike is they have more than 60 enormous air-conditioned shopping malls, which is where people tend to go rushing off to when the weather gets extremely bad. When we were there, which I think was January, I want to say. Yes, it was January. That's actually a very good time to be in this part of the world because while the weather is certainly very warm, it's nowhere near as bad as it is later on when you get into late spring and summer, when it can be unbearably hot and also extremely humid. There's also a lot of rain, as you can imagine, but the rainy season really doesn't pick up until later in the spring. So when we were there, there was some rain, but it's not continual like it will be once you get into April and May. This is the neighborhood around our hotel, which looks awful. This picture makes it look like it's a seedy, disgusting area, but it's not. It's a delightful place. It's a big, bustling city, so there's a lot of that atmosphere. But again, as I said, it does feel very safe. And although it's crowded, And if you're not a city person, that can take a little bit to get used to. I think it's actually a pretty comfortable city to spend time in. There's a wide range of buildings there, lots and lots of skyscrapers. And it's kind of interesting. I found the city interesting because it was hard to imagine that there was any zoning whatsoever. You would find 40 and 50-story skyscrapers like this immediately next to neighborhoods that had guest houses like ours that were only 2 or 3 stories high. The most famous skyscrapers in the city are the Petronas Towers, which were built in '98. I'll show you those in a couple of minutes. They're about 450 meters high and made out of stainless steel. And until the mid-2000s were the tallest buildings in the world. With all the construction that's been going on worldwide with super tall skyscrapers, that most buildings don't hold a record like that for very long before someone else built something taller. But again, here is just an idea of what some of the streetscape looks like with comfortable local housing, apartment buildings, and skyscrapers right around the corner. This is called the Menara KL Tower, Kuala Lumpur Tower, which is almost as high as the Petronas Tower and actually has a better view because it's actually higher. It's up on a hill. And it has the advantage, if you go up to the top, of having a great view of the Petronas Tower. So if you want to see what they look like from further away, it's a nice place to go. And it's in this lovely park that you can walk up to the top of. And this is the view from it. You can see KL actually has a surprising amount of green space in it. It is not a Western city with a very strong grid pattern. It's a confusing city with roads. It's more like Boston. The roads go all over the place. You can see there's this mix of very low-rise local old neighborhoods with skyscrapers sprouting all over the place in between them, but a surprising number of parks that make the city very green. And that makes it kind of nice to walk around because it's not like being in the middle of Manhattan. You always are coming around the corner to see some of the beautiful tropical foliage. I'm just looking in several directions from that tall tower. This is a close-up view of a place we'll visit a little bit later called, which is the main national mosque for Malaysia, which is architecturally extremely beautiful. And behind it are a couple of the important museums that we'll also stop into. But just looking in every direction around, you can see it's quite a ways from the ocean. It is on a river, but again, the reason that it was built where it was because of tin mining. So this was never a port city in the traditional sense, but it had rivers that allowed the goods that were produced there to get out to the shipping industry. But it actually is surrounded by some beautiful tropical hills and mountains that are always kind of in the background. And here is a very good view from that tower of the Petronas Towers. So these were built in 1998, 450 meters tall, which at the time they were built was the tallest structures anywhere in the world. They were built by Cesar Pelli, who is an Argentinian architect who has built things all over the world. He's a very famous architect. These buildings have now been surpassed by, I think, at least 18 to 20 other skyscrapers. The current reigning champion is the Burj Dubai. Is that true? Yes. It's actually, I think they changed the name to Burj Khalifa now, actually, which is the one in Dubai that is currently the tallest skyscraper in the world. This is a very elegant building, though, and very distinctive, I think. This is actually 2 identical towers that are joined by a sky bridge. And I think compared to a lot of the other super tall skyscrapers that have been built around the world, particularly in the Middle East and in Asia, I think these, although they've been surpassed in height, I still think they are among the most beautiful in the world. Some of the more large mosques and government buildings that you can see around the city. But again, right next to them, this looks like it could be a neighborhood in parts of southern Florida or any number of other places in Asia. And this is mixed right next to neighborhoods with incredibly tall skyscrapers. You can, in fact, you can walk to this neighborhood from the Petronas Towers. To give you a little bit of a comparison, here are the Petronas Towers back when they were the tallest thing around. And now there are several other things that have surpassed them. Here's Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is not quite twice as high. And even more since then. The Shanghai Tower went up, the World Trade Center in New York, just to give you an idea of where they fit. I find them an interesting building, though, because they remind me a little bit, and this is certainly not the intent, but they remind me a little bit of almost of a European Gothic cathedral, because they have these very tall identical spires connected with a sky bridge that makes them almost look like the facade of a cathedral. That was certainly not Pelly's intent. And in fact, if you look at, you can see all the ins and outs of the structure. If you were to look at the floor plan, it's actually designed to look like a flower, a typical flower of Malaysia. And that was the reason for the design of these little jagged and curled indentations in the building. Inside the base, there's a complex of other buildings as well, and also a beautiful park with lakes and so forth. And inside is a multi-level shopping mall, which it's hard to go anywhere in Kuala Lumpur without finding a shopping mall. And they are huge. They far surpass anything that you would see anywhere in our area here. Here again, this is a little better view of the two towers connected with the bridge. You can go up. We didn't go up because we went up the other tower instead. But you can actually go up and walk across the sky bridge if you want. And I think you can go up to the top as well for another view. Just some scenes strolling around the parks below the Petronas Towers. It's beautiful tropical parkland, urban parks with water features and benches and tropical gardens and so forth. It's really quite a successful development that has kind of become one of the main civic centers of the city. And you can see it's surrounded by a number of other skyscrapers as well that have sprung up since then. The area around it is a pretty busy downtown area. Again, it's a financial district. So this particular part of the city is a little bit less residential. This is where you'll find restaurants and shops and a lot of tourist destinations and so forth. But there's a number of places that you can visit around the city that are so beautiful and representative of so many different cultures, which is one of the things I really liked about the city. This was, I think we did take public transit to get here, but you could actually walk. This is called the Thianhu Buddhist Temple, dedicated to the Heavenly Mother. And it was opened in 1989 and is now a very active center for the Chinese community. So this is not a historic monument. This is, barely, 30 years old or so, but it sits way up on a hill. And the architecture is just exquisite, extremely beautiful colors, the kinds that you would see on any elaborate Chinese temple. The Chinese are probably the single largest ethnic group represented in KL and in the country as a whole, even though there's quite a few others as well. So it's almost like a microcosm of Southeast Asia, where you can see representative architecture from India, from Thailand, from China, from Vietnam, sprinkled around the city. It's so different from the kind of buildings and details that we would put in Christian churches, certainly churches in the United States. Lots of these decorations are elaborately colored, life-size creatures, fantastic creatures, real creatures. This is looking back from this temple up on its hill. It's on a beautiful forested park hill looking back towards the downtown area, and you can see the Petronas Towers off in the distance. And not far from here is the central part of the original city. When I mentioned the two rivers that come together where they originally found tin deposits, Kuala Lumpur is actually a Malay term that translates to muddy confluence, which is exactly what it was, two very muddy rivers that come together. At the two rivers again of the Klang and the Gombak, and they come together here. This is the Klang. I kind of feel bad that for a city that really wouldn't exist if it weren't for these rivers. The modern city really doesn't pay too much attention to them, so there's not a lot of beautiful river frontage. There's no river walk that you can take. You almost don't see them when you're walking through the city. I think there's a few places where they're trying to improve on that, but it's not terribly noticeable. This is not Paris or London with a beautiful river running through it. This is about the most exciting that you that you see, the Klang, the banks of the Klang. I'm a big fan of markets when I travel, even if I'm not actually buying anything. And of course, they do have all of the shopping malls with lots of Asian and Western stores, international stores, but there's tons and tons of local street markets as well that sell local goods for the residents, and also food, fruits, vegetables, meats, fish, all that kind of thing. I don't know if any of you are familiar with durians and jackfruit, which are Southeast Asian fruits. You can see them here. They're known for having a truly appalling smell. It smells like something died, and they're popular with the locals. And I think it's kind of popular to try and foist them on the tourists because they smell so bad. But if you eat them, they actually are. If you ignore the smell, the taste is actually quite delicious, very creamy. It's almost like a custard, and very sweet. So it's really only the odor of the plant or of the fruit that's really bad. They're very popular there. You can find them even here in Massachusetts in a few of the Asian markets. And here's a couple of other kinds of fruits. The rambutans at the top, which are also quite delicious, and dragon fruits down below. And of course, this being Asia, you're going to see all kinds of fruits and vegetables that are completely different from what we would normally see here in the New World. This is a popular street called Jalan Alor, which is one of the central areas for outdoor dining. There are tons and tons of restaurants here serving all kinds of food. Malaysian food is delicious. And of course, but you can also get ethnic cuisines from all the other ethnic groups that are in the city. This is a very popular place to go because the restaurants spill out into the street. There's not as much traffic. It's mostly pedestrianized. And the food is very inexpensive. You can try all kinds of fun stuff, like, for example, frog porridge. Like this. Here I am eating frog porridge, crunchy frogs. The taste was fine. It was kind of like oatmeal with little bits of frog in it. And it tasted delicious. I have to say the bones were a little bit annoying. But the taste was very good, and I love to try all kinds of different things. I'm going to take a quick look at some of the questions that have come up. What does koala mean? As I mentioned, Kuala Lumpur refers to the two rivers coming together. Kuala, I think, is a reference to a where two rivers meet, and Lumpur refers to them being muddy, which they are, very much so. Someone also asked if the rivers are polluted, and I can't say for sure, other than having looked at them. My guess is yes, and they are certainly. I would say that, given the general level of pollution in such a large city, I think it is, most likely yes. I think I would say they're polluted. I wouldn't swim in them, let's put it that way, and I certainly wouldn't eat anything that came out of them. There's a wide variety of food. Whoops, there you go. I'll show you a little bit more later. It is typical Asian food, with vegetarian options and meat options. There's lots of street food, fried right on the street, lots of local vegetables. Malaysian food is spicy, not too, you can get a lot of stuff that isn't too spicy. I actually like it a little bit. I found that it had more, there was more interesting variety to me to Malaysian food compared to the Thai and Vietnamese food that I've had. It struck me more, and this would make sense given the geography. It was a little bit more like Indonesian food, if you're familiar with that. I loved it. Had a number of excellent meals there, and the food is very, very cheap. The sidewalks, on the other hand, as you can see here, are downright dangerous, particularly if you're walking at night, and on a street that has no street lights. This was our street, actually. The little blue building that you might be able to see in the corner was our guest house. But if you're not watching where you're going, you could easily end up in one of these ditches that helps drain rainwater. When there's a massive rainstorm, it feels like a flash flood. These drainage ditches are all over the city to try and deal with that. An alternative kind of housing, just to give you a little perspective here, compared to our pleasant little two-story guest house, this was an apartment building not far from us that shows you a totally different style of life. And there's quite a bit of this in Kuala Lumpur. Speaking of food, you can get all kinds of junk food as well, including cuttlefish flavored crackers. This again is back for dinner at that nice street. I like these kinds of places too, just because of the people watching. There's lots of things to see, locals, tourists alike, and people from all different ethnic groups coming together. But nonetheless, the city does actually have its own little neighborhoods. And one of the biggest and most popular to visit is Little India, which was formerly known as Brickfields. And it was named that because for a long time, it was the part of the city that had clay pits where they made bricks. Now it's a big center of the Indian population. So there's a lot of Hindu temples here as well. And you can see kind of a mix of architecture here. So there's skyscrapers, but there's also these kind of neoclassical buildings built in the early 20th century as the city was becoming a modern 20th century city. And here also you will find the oldest mosque in the city, although it's Little India, but here's a Muslim mosque built in 1907 at the very historic center of the city. This is very close to where the rivers come together. Unusually, it was designed by a British architect. And when we were there, it was under renovation. I assume it's been completed then, so we couldn't see the inside, but it's a beautiful old building that's now over 100 years old. And all throughout this Little India area, you can see, in fact, from many parts of the city, you can see the Petronas Towers off in the distance, hovering over the skyline. Here's an old movie house from the 1920s that is still actually used to show films. And lots and lots of interesting little local stores. This is a bookstore, but they also have shops selling saris and everything imaginable. There is a Chinatown part of the city. There's this Little India. If you like exploring those kind of ethnic neighborhoods, that was one of the joys of the city. Is you can each ethnic group has its kind of own little corner of the city to where you can find restaurants and shops and markets that cater to those populations. There's also a lot of really ugly architecture, to be quite frank. As I said, I don't think KL has made much of an effort at zoning or design criteria. So there are beautiful historic buildings and temples right next to the most god-awful stuff that clearly got put up by somebody who was cutting corners on design costs. And being a very modern city, it's also kind of funny to see this as well, where some of the most important daily activities are done by people using tools from 100 years ago, but they work perfectly well. Also in Little India is this old mansion called the Loki Mansion, which was built in the 1860s, not long after the city really got going as a tin center. And it's been recently restored. And it was originally built in the 1860s as a mansion for one of the wealthy tin magnates at the time. And in 100 years later, it was used by the Japanese High Command as their command center when Malaysia was occupied during World War II by the Japanese. With all the different ethnic groups, of course, you find a wide variety of street dress. You'll find very traditional Muslims, but you'll also find people wearing extremely Western dress, not just tourists, but locals as well. In that respect, it reminded me a little of Istanbul, which is another place where a lot of cultures come together, both very traditional and very modern. Here's a store that sells just headscarves. The real historic center of the city, the colonial center of the city, I should say, is called Merdeka Square, which means Independence Square. There's a lovely park and a lot of very beautiful historic buildings there, which, again, interestingly, were mostly designed by British architects. This is the City Hall and also a theater. And right next to it, you'll find this was a kind of odd, twisty building that was under construction at the time. And these strange lampposts that have sort of like Dr. Seuss flowers growing at the top. And this truly bizarre sculpture of, this was probably 20 feet high in the middle of the park. And it's supposed to represent tropical pitcher plants, which you may have seen in botanical gardens at some point. But here they are, big enough to swallow a whole human being. But the area around this square is very beautiful with all of these colonial style buildings that, even though they're a weird design because they were designed by Western architects who were trying to give their impression of the exotic East. And ironically now, 100 or more than 100 years later, they represent some of the most beautiful historic architecture in the city. This is the Sultan Abdul Samad building, which was the administrative building when it was still a colony. And so this was kind of like the main government building at that time. And it has this landmark clock tower in the middle. And now it houses government ministries. But you can see this was kind of a mishmash of, there's a certain European and British feel to it, a very colonial feel, but all these elements of what the British architects perceived to be exotic Eastern design. The same was true in India. You'll see a lot of that in India when British architects were designing buildings under the Raj. It's a very similar kind of effect. And right across the park from it is the Royal Selangor Club, built in the 1880s in this sort of mock Tudor style. This was a private club for the elite colonial rulers, basically built by the high-ranking British officials for their own pleasure. Now they play cricket there. Cricket is extremely popular in Malaysia, which is true, I think, of many former British colonies. And believe it or not, right across the street is the Anglican Cathedral, 1894. Again, all of these buildings are from the time period when there were British colonial rulers and administrators stationed there, and they built things to make their lives comfortable. This is looking back towards you can see the tower and the observation tower in the back. And this other very beautiful building with the stripes on it is the National Textiles Museum, which has a superb collection if you're interested in textiles. And behind it, this skyscraper is actually one of the more successful ones. It was built in the 1980s. It's called the Dayabumi complex, and it was one of the very first skyscrapers in the city. And it has a very distinctive Islamic influence, which you can see in the sort of flower and star shape of the floor plan, and also the arches at the top. And it's a very serene kind of building that I think the design is quite successful even today, 40 years later, unlike a lot of the other stuff that has been built. Not far from here, you can walk to Masjid Negara, which is the national mosque of Malaysia. I think I showed you a photo of this from way up high on top of that tower. This was built in the mid-1960s, which you can kind of tell from looking at it. And it's enormous. It holds about 15,000 worshippers. And the main minaret that you see here is well over 200 feet high. And you can visit it. It's surrounded by beautiful acres of gardens. The roofs, get a better view, I'll go back here. The roof is kind of supposed to recall an umbrella in the process of opening. But there are, it's got a very beautiful blue and green color scheme. There are fountains and reflecting pools, acres and acres of gardens. And it certainly has a mid-20th century look. There's no question about it, but I think it actually is quite a beautiful building, particularly at night. You have a chance to go at night. And although it is a mosque, you are allowed to, as a non-Muslim, you would be allowed to enter. The only place that you can't go is into the main prayer hall, although you can look through the doorway as I'm doing here, but you just can't enter. So as modern as it is, I think it's a very beautiful building, very serene inside. Here's an interesting Muslim clock, an Arab with Arabic letter. It actually goes backwards, counterclockwise to what we would normally see a clock do. So this is actually, I think, about 20 past 12 or 40 past 12. And very close here, all of these buildings that I'm showing you are within a few blocks of each other, which is why they're really the main historic core of the city. This is a railway station also designed by a British architect in 1911. And along with the Railway Administration Building, which is right across the street, it used to be the main railway station for the city. Now it's become just a part of the network of commuter rail for KL. And the main railway station has been replaced. There's a very modern station called Central Station, a little further to the south. But again, it's just this, you would swear this was a palace somewhere in India. Unfortunately, the exterior is a lot nicer than the interior. We did take the train. It's a bit dingy when you get inside. I think it could use some sprucing up. And again, being a Muslim country, there will be some things that are a little strange to encounter, like cars that are exclusively for women and also children. Excuse me, to keep the sexes separated on public transit. I'm going to take you just on a couple of excursions outside of the city, which are easy to get to. You could take, if you were there, you could certainly take an organized tour, but I don't think that's necessary because the transit system is very easy to use and very inexpensive. So to get to the Batu Caves, which are maybe a half an hour north of the city, all you have to do is hop the commuter rail, the metro, and you can be there in a very short time for like $2. This is one of the prime Hindu sites in the area. And here you can see an enormous statue of Lord Subramanian, who is one of the Tamil Hindu deities. These caves, which are part of the karst formation that is the geology common to a lot of Southeast Asia, is now a major pilgrimage site for Hindus, especially during the Thaipusam celebration, which is usually it's a major Hindu festival in usually January or February, where millions, literally millions of people come to these caves to make a pilgrimage. The caves were discovered in the 19th century, even though, of course, by locals, they had been known for a very long time. And this is kind of what you see as you approach them. The mountain that the caves are part of is about 300 feet tall or so. And there are just the most incredible, if you've never seen Hindu temples or Hindu architecture and Hindu sculpture, it's completely over the top. And it's really fun because the detail, the color is just incredible. And of course, you're going to see a lot of the Hindu population here because this whole area around the caves is a focal point for that population. The big draw is this incredibly tall statue. And then there's about 300 steps that you take to ascend into the caves, which are kind of in the center of the mountain. And as you go up the stairs, you'll see this wide variety of representations of different Hindu deities. I won't pretend in the least to understand the intricacies of Hindu worship, but there are all kinds of different deities representing different concepts and as part of their pantheon. And some of them are just, they're incredible. It's just amazing to see all this detail and vivid colors. And of course, plenty of Hindu tourists were there as well, because even though we weren't there at the time of the festival, it is a pilgrimage spot, not just for tourists to go see, but devout Hindus from all over go to see this very important spot. When you get up into the top, after you've climbed all of these stairs, the caves are actually huge. They're at least probably a couple 100 feet high, I would guess, when you get inside. And because it's a pilgrimage place, there's still a lot of schlock that you can buy. So you can buy Hindu schlock, you can buy little models of the Petronas towers. But it is still a religious site, and this is what it looks like inside. And looking up, there's the mountain actually has this hole in the roof, essentially, where the caves have an open roof, like a skylight that goes out the center of the mountain. And it's not actually that far away. Here we are looking out the entrance to the caves, but you can see it's only, 10 miles or so. You can see the tower and the Patronus Towers off in the distance. And it's a very easy metro line route that takes maybe half an hour. Very easy to get to on your own. While you're there, you may run into monkeys like this with a baby. They will eat anything that they can come across, including your ice cream cone. So you should avoid them. They're actually kind of nasty. They look cute, but you don't want to get close to them. We stopped for lunch. Here's just some examples of Malaysian food, which you can get all different varieties of. Of course, Malaysia relies a lot on rice and spicy vegetable mixes and noodles as well, although more rice than noodles. And we ate in this nice little local restaurant for lunch where they had signs showing you how if you eat their food, you can go from this to this because their food is so healthy. Back downtown in Kuala Lumpur, it's a very different atmosphere. I was found it kind of interesting that a skyscraper, this skyscraper must have had, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 floors. And apparently when it was built, it didn't occur to them to try to find some way of doing central air conditioning. So everybody has little air conditioning units stuck on the outside of this enormously tall skyscraper. Now that I think of it, we were actually there in December. This was a trip where we started here and ended up in Thailand, visiting friends in Thailand. So I think we're here just around the holidays and the New Year. So a lot of the Christmas decorations were still up, which is a little odd when you think that although there are some Christians in Malaysia, they're a relatively minor part of the population. But still, all of the downtown area had Christmas trees and Christmas decorations in all the shopping malls, which was a little cognitive dissonance for us. And here's the area around the Patronus Towers at night, including our guest house. This is the back to the Patronus Towers again. Here's the enormous shopping mall built into the base. And you should absolutely go visit there at night because the entire area is lit up and it's incredibly dramatic to see all the skyscrapers lit up. And there is a elaborate fountain system as well that does shows throughout the evening. The next day we went to Chinatown, which, like Little India, is a fairly large section of the city, but completely devoted to the Chinese population. And it's centered around a street called Petaling Street. And as I said, I think about roughly 20% of the population of the city is Chinese. So this is a big part of the city. And the main religions for the Chinese, which are Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, are all practiced here. And you will find a variety of Chinese style temples in this area as well. And the sublime and the ridiculous too. Here's an entire store selling nothing but Hello Kitty stuff. but it's an enormous area, and it's a lot of fun to stroll around. It certainly would remind you of Chinatown in San Francisco or Chinatown in New York, any big city Chinatown. It goes on for a significant area, and this building here, which kind of looks Art Deco, is actually Art Deco. It was built in the 1930s as the big central market for the city, not specifically for the Chinatown area, but for KL as a whole. You can see that Islamic skyscraper kind of peeking out from behind it, all covered in white marble. But this building was actually slated for demolition in the 1970s. And someone fortunately banded some people together, and they saved it and restored it. So it is now still being used as a market. But it's kind of nice to see one of the few Art Deco buildings in the city still in use for its original purpose. Here's one of the local public transit stops. KL has an excellent public transit system. So again, you would be insane to drive a car anywhere in KL, but there's extensive bus service, train services, and trams and metros that make it very easy to get around the city. Not so much because it's a big city. A lot of the stuff you could walk to, but if it's hot, you may not want to walk in high heat and humidity. So it's nice to have the option of quickly taking very inexpensive public transit to get from one place to another. Here's another one of the important temples in Chinatown. This is actually the oldest Taoist temple in the city from the 1860s. So not long after the city really was established as a mining center. It's called the Seiya Temple. And it's kind of an odd layout because I don't know if you can see from this image that we're looking along the street, but the temple itself inside behind the wall is completely askew. And that's mainly because of Feng Shui. The temple is designed according to the principles of Feng Shui. So it's oriented that way. And it's very beautiful inside, again, very Chinese in style. Here it is from the outside, but, and again, towering over this ancient looking temple are all the skyscrapers of the downtown area. Another example of the extreme danger of not watching where you're walking. You could easily twist an ankle if you're not careful in the city. Or for that matter, if you were not careful in your parking, you could end up losing an axle too. This reminded me of a lot of the kinds of local lunch counter restaurants that we have here in Massachusetts and so many of our cities and towns, where the locals just go for breakfast, usually the guys, hang out, talk, discuss the latest news, and have some interesting breakfast foods. Another of the important temples in Chinatown is the Quanti Temple. A little bit later, this was built towards the end of the 19th century, but also very, very atmospheric. And it's dedicated specifically to a very important historical Chinese general who was revered as a Taoist god of war and a god of literature. And this is what it looks like inside, with incense burning and very elaborate decorations, again, in typical Chinese style. Lots of interesting things. If you're willing to be adventurous in your cuisine, you can try all kinds of stuff. And here I wanted to give you an example of a Hindu temple, because again, they are so different. So this is the same style that we were seeing in the caves north of the city, but this is a more traditional style city temple. This is called the Sri Maha Mariamman Hindu Temple, and it is also very old. It's the oldest Hindu temple in Malaysia, founded in 1873. And as many Hindu temples have this huge pyramid of representative sculptures with unbelievable detail. This particular one is dedicated to the South Indian mother goddess. And during the festival I mentioned called Thaipusam, which is usually held in January or February, there is an idol that is carried from here on foot all the way to the Batu Caves, several miles north of the city, followed by an immense crowd of tens and tens of thousands of people. And here's the inside of the temple. Unlike the Muslim mosques, you don't have to be an observant member of these religions or faiths to enter any of these temples. Obviously, it's important to be respectful and reserved in your behavior, but there is no religious prohibition on people visiting. But it's kind of funny to see something like this. Just by way of comparison, here is a nice New England church, a very typical congregational church in New England, which could not be more different from that. So having been born and raised here in Massachusetts, it's kind of fun to see this incredibly exuberant style of representations of concepts of faith. And in fact, these are the buildings immediately around the temple where even on the neighboring buildings, they have sculptures of animals and other deities looking out. Inside the temple, these are little oil lamps. And some of the representative Hindu population. Even on the front of the building, there's these horses. This reminded me a little bit of, I don't know if any of you have been to St. Mark's in Venice. The cathedral in Venice has the original sculptures of the horses. And of course, this is completely different, but it reminded me of it right on the roof overlooking the street. And again, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Happy Planet, where you can buy all manner of real and fake flowers. Here we are back again. This is the literal confluence of the rivers. You can see two rivers coming together into one. And right behind it is Kolam Biru, which is the oldest mosque in the city. And this is one of the few places where there actually is a little bit of renovation and development to kind of make the area around the rivers look kind of nice. So there are some bridges that go across, and they light this whole area up with blue lights at night, with fountains and pools and stuff like that. So this was actually kind of a nice area, and it's just historically important because this is really where the name of the city comes from. This is the Kuala Lumpur, where the two muddy rivers come together. Unfortunately, the rest of it looks like this. So it's not like you would be likely to stroll along here. A highlight, even if you don't think you're interested in this sort of thing, I would recommend it for the building alone, is the Islamic Arts Museum, which is a superb collection of all manner of Islamic arts. And the building itself, this is the main dome, is spectacular. Here's the entrance. It was built in the 1980s, and it focuses on decorative arts. So they have clothing, textiles, ceramics, paintings. They even have an entire section on architectural models. It's an absolutely stunning collection. If you are at all interested in Islamic art, or even if not, you can learn an awful lot there. And the building alone is just exquisitely beautiful. each section has these domes, and there are gardens surrounding the terraces, and each major hall has one of these very impressive domes. So I would say if you ever go to KL, I would definitely put that in the top 10 of things to do when you're there. It's also a beautiful part of the city to stroll around in, because it's in an area that has a lot more parkland, which is why you might be accosted by the occasional monkey. And there's a superb botanical garden and an aviary where a lot of people go to hang out. This is kind of like their central park. The bird park is one of the world's largest aviaries. In fact, it focuses, of course, on species from Southeast Asia, but they are some of the more exotic birds you'll see, and they tend to, for the most part, they're kind of just freely walking around. There are a few areas where they're under nets, but it's a spectacular place to just walk around, enjoy, get an ice cream, drink out of a coconut, stay in the shade, and see some of the most incredible birds. And because of the way they have them displayed, usually in enclosed, covered aviaries, you can actually get up very close to a lot of them. Here's a sacred ibis drinking out of a coconut. I don't know what a group of storks is, but this is one. Here's an example of some very conservatively dressed Muslim women. Hornbills, we had some hornbills there. And of course, it's a great place to take kids. I don't know if you would be traveling with children, but if you are, this would be one of the things that I think they would enjoy the most, because you can have personal encounters with all sorts of different exotic birds. And most of what you're seeing in these pictures are, in fact, Malaysian species that can be seen in different parts of the country. And if you want, you can even do this. I did notice here, just outside the entrance, this sign was kind of funny. There was this small kiosk type building, which they had to put this sign up because clearly a lot of people thought it was a public restroom when in fact it was a prayer hall for local Muslims. The restrooms were in a completely different location. Here's a good shot of the public transit system. They have a light rail that goes around. They don't really have an underground because the geology in the KL area just does not lend itself to digging. So pretty much everything that they have is above ground or at ground level, but it makes it very convenient to get around the downtown area, because driving is not convenient. Driving is an absolute hot mess. In fact, this traffic cop that you can see here is in fact a robot. He's not a real human being. But his arm went down, up and down. So this is a typical street in downtown KL with all manner of pedestrians, motorcyclists, bicycles, people milling around, people carrying stuff. So taxis, you definitely don't want to drive, and there's no need to, absolutely no need even walking. Here's David demonstrating how, again, walking can be very dangerous. The other excursion that I don't know that many people actually do it, but we found it quite interesting. Way at the beginning of the program, I think I mentioned that Malaysia is moving a number of their major government functions to a completely new planned city that's about 25 kilometers, so like 15 miles away from downtown Kuala Lumpur. It's a new administrative center, and they started shifting things there about 20 years ago, but it's been under construction continually and will probably continue for many years into the future. The Kuala Lumpur still remains the official royal capital. So that's where the king is based, and a number of important governmental departments are still there. But a lot of the administrative stuff has moved out to Putrajaya, and it is pretty much everything that you see there is less than 25 years old, even though it's a mammoth undertaking. It's a planned city along the lines of Canberra in Australia or Brasilia in Brazil, where they've kind of created this brand new capital city right out of the jungle. And it has the look and feel of a planned city also. More than a third of it is open space, which is kind of nice, but it also makes it very sprawling. So it doesn't have quite the charm and the atmosphere of the old city. When we visited there, the population was about 30,000. And since then it has tripled. It's now almost up to about 100,000 people, most of whom are government workers or people in service industries somehow related to the government. Unlike downtown Kuala Lumpur, almost everybody who lives in Putrajaya is Muslim. So it's a very artificial, very different kind of place. Here's one of the major mosques there. This is the Putra Mosque, which is about the same size as the one down the Central National Mosque downtown. It can seat about 15,000 worshippers. Beautiful building. You can get to Putrajaya, again, on public transit very easily. There's a line that takes you out. I think it's probably a 45-minute ride out from the central station in downtown KL. And once you get there, it's enormous. So you wouldn't really be able to walk around it. But what you could do is, what we did is we just took a bus tour that left right from the metro station. I think it cost all of maybe $1 or $2 to take like a 2-hour bus tour where they drove you around all the major sites, which saves a lot on walking. But it's a very monumental new city. So there's a little bit of a feel of sterility to it. I have to say that. But it's impressive nonetheless, and it's huge. There's artificial lakes and rivers. There are elaborate architectural masterpieces being done by famous architects all over the place. Here I am in front of the mosque. Here's another one of the mosques. This is called the Iron Mosque, which almost looks like something out of Star Trek. This is the second big mosque for Putrajaya, and it's even larger. It holds 20,000 people. We did not, that was one that we were not able to get inside to see what the interior looked like. And actually, I should go back. You can see what looks almost like a smokestack is actually the minaret that is associated with the mosque. And all along the riverfront and the lakefront in this whole area are enormous modern government buildings. These are things like the finance ministry and the education ministry and the justice department and all those kinds of things. There's a particularly beautiful bridge. And this imposing building, which looks like it might be a mosque, um, and sort of like the Taj Mahal, is actually the office of the Prime Minister. This is that first mosque I showed you again. This I think was one of the nicer buildings in the area. They even had, believe it or not, I say this as a librarian, they had these little library book drop kiosks where you could borrow and return books from their library system. And they even had free Wi-Fi. Let's see up there. The problem, I think, with this city, though, is that it's so huge that it really doesn't feel walkable in the way that downtown Boston would be or downtown KL would be. It doesn't. It's just too big, and it is very well connected to the rest of the city. There's a direct connection to the airport. There are local monorails that can take you around, and boats also that will take you around within the city, but it's just so vast, it doesn't really feel like a comfortable strolling city. But it is surrounded by some beautiful, lush countryside. The building that you can see up on the hill is the Foreign Ministry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And there's a number of administrative skyscrapers. This one, I believe this one, it was one or the other of these, and I want to say it's the one on the left, was pointed out to us because unusually it was designed by a female architect, female Muslim architect, which for this country would be rather unusual. Here's another one of the very modern bridges. There's also some more traditional style bridges. When you get to the far end of Putrajaya, there's this, what looks like a spaceship is actually the convention center built up high on a hill with this great view all the way back. And the bridge that connects to it is supposed to resemble the Pont Alexandre in Paris, which I think I can kind of see it, but I don't think it's terribly successful at imitating that. But this is, as you can see, a very not modern bridge. It's a very traditional style bridge, kind of imitating a more European look. This is the second national palace. There is a national palace for the king back in downtown KL, but this is a royal retreat in Putrajaya. So this, what looks like an enormous hotel, is actually just the palace for the king. And here's a view looking, if you go up on the hill where the convention center is, you can look down. Now, you'll see a lot of this looks like it's under construction, which it is. At the time we were there, a lot of it had not yet been completed, and that's still going on. I think the long-term plan for Putrajaya is, decades into the future as it is slowly built out to accommodate more and more government functions. And here's a view looking back just only to the south part. This is that European style bridge, and this central avenue goes a good 3 or so miles all the way back up to the very tiny building you can see in the back with the dome. That's the Prime Minister's office, I should say. But it's a good 3 miles from one to the other. So it makes an interesting excursion. I don't know how it's a little, it's just different. There's a certain artificial feel to it, almost a Disneyland kind of feel to it. But nonetheless, it's a very important part of modern Malaysia. So it's worth visiting only for that, just to see how Malaysia is looking at itself in the future. This is the Palace of Justice, essentially the Supreme Court building for Malaysia. And the local government built offices, because Putrajaya is actually a city in its own right. So in addition to all these government buildings, there's a huge amount of residential buildings and apartments for the people who live there and work there. So this is the city hall for Putrajaya in a very sort of modern Islamic look. And the center has 3 miles of this massive pedestrian promenade that goes from one end to the other. I'm not sure, you can see, given the heat, that not a lot of people are strolling in the 80 to 90 degree heat, but it's a nice thought. And way outside, again, you can see this if you take one of those bus tours. This building that looks a lot like a golf resort is the office. I'm sorry, not the office, the actual residence. This is the official residence of the Prime Minister. And then you can take the train back. There was a rainstorm as we were heading back into KL. On the train, you get a beautiful view of the city as the skyline as you're taking the train back. And again, just to talk a little bit about the shopping, I had to show you some of KL's many large and air-conditioned malls, so that when the weather is terrible, you could spend an entire day, if this is your thing, strolling around all manner of stores. Although, of course, like many of these kinds of shopping malls, no matter what city in the world they're in, you're going to see the same stores. I think I saw one of the questions. Yes, I'm sorry, I missed one of the questions. Someone was asking whether who actually is spending the money in these malls, whether it's locals or tourists. I would say it's a little bit of both, but I would say the people who are shopping here are either tourists or high-end locals. And of course, KL is another one of those international cities that has a significant spread of income. So there are plenty of very poor people in KL who would be very unlikely to shop here, although they may come here to get cool and wander around, but they are unlikely to be spending high prices. But the city certainly has plenty of wealthy residents who would be happy to shop here. This is looking out. Many of these malls have 10, 15 stories in them, all with shops. It's kind of mind-boggling. And I had to do something which I don't know why I felt I had to do this, just because it was weird. These are my feet. And there was a particular place where you could go and get a fish pedicure, where there are these little teeny fish called doctor fish. They're little, they're a kind of carp, but they don't have any teeth. They just have little lips. And the idea is you put your feet in the tub and in the pool, you dangle your feet into the pool, and they eat off all the dead skin from your feet. And it's supposed to be like a pedicure. And I, of course, had to do it just because it's the sort of thing that you do. I actually found it kind of fun. I don't think I need to do it again. But you listen to soothing music, and it's, and I think it was actually good for my feet. It was a little odd, again, to see Christmas decorations the same way you'd see it at Burlington Mall or any place in Boston. That was a little strange. But again, these malls are absolutely gargantuan. This is just one corner of one mall. Many of them have literally hundreds of stores. And then a few blocks away, there's another mall with another several hundred stores, many of which are duplicates. I'm not one who does a lot of shopping when I travel, but this in Kuala Lumpur, the malls are actually almost an attraction in themselves, even if you aren't someone who enjoys shopping. Just experiencing something that's just such a part of Kuala Lumpur life. Here's one, for example, that had, I think, at least 15 stories in it, all with shops. It's absolutely incredible. Some of them are big enough to have whole indoor amusement parks with roller coasters inside the building. If you've been to Dubai or seen any travel presentations on Dubai, you'll know there's a lot of that there as well. Some of it is just a desire to be over the top and attract shoppers and tourists. Some of it is just because this is a way to make a lot of activities possible in a climate where doing it outdoors is just downright unpleasant because it rains a lot of the year and it's unbearably hot and humid for a lot of the year. So just build a giant mall and put it all inside. And I'm going to end the program with one good thing about the malls is they have superb food courts. And if you want to get a variety of different food, the food courts in some of these malls were incredible. They'd be like 20 or 30 different restaurants with Malaysian food and Vietnamese food and Chinese food, all different kinds of things to try with very, very reasonable prices. And a lot of people do go there to eat, and it's fine for tourism as well. And the food is pretty inexpensive, so you don't have to go to a high-end restaurant to get really good, interesting food. And I just love this place because they had multiple O's and multiple umlauts, supposedly making the noodles more interesting, I guess. I don't know. If you ever go there, I actually think the food courts are worth a stop. So I will end my program there, and I'm going to stop my share. Oh, good, we're right on time. And if anyone has any additional questions, I want to go through and see did I miss any questions?
Renee had a couple of questions. So first, please tell us more about what the local food tastes like. Did you get that? I think you told us about that one.
I kind of tried to cover some of that. I don't remember a lot of specifics. I do remember just finding Malaysian food was so varied. There was just like, and of course it's Asian. It has a lot of very typical there's noodles, there's rice, there's
is it spicy?
Meat with sauces. It can be, but not all of it is.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like a lot of the other cuisine in that part of the world. There are some dishes that are very spicy. There are some that aren't. There's certainly plenty of vegetarian dishes if that's
good. Yeah.
important to you, but there's also plenty of meat. There's lots of street food, and the street food is fun because you can just try all kinds of things.
Oh yeah, Donnie was asking, is it safe to eat street food? Yeah, there's no ingredients listing, I guess.
No. Yeah, I could tell you stories. I won't.
I know.
You don't want any of those details. But yes, I have certainly experienced. I had a very bad papaya once in Bangkok. That I'll just leave it there. In general, cooked foods are safer. And in general, fruit, that was my mistake. I ate fruit that was cut up, like in a salad.
Okay, right.
It is much better to, if you're going to eat fruits and vegetables, eat something where you can wash it, you can peel the skin off, so it's, and it can kind of depend on where in the city you are. So definitely, if you're staying in a hotel, ask them what neighborhoods are good for that, what aren't. Guidebooks are usually good at being able to give you an idea of if there are places in the city where that kind of stuff is not as good. You never know. Even in a nice restaurant, you could have a bad experience. But cooked food is usually not, particularly like if you're eating some deep fried thing that kind of stuff is usually okay. I think where you're more likely to run into trouble is fruits and vegetables that might not have been properly washed. Yeah.
And you rented a house, and so was there you had a refrigerator in the house.
No, this was like it was a guest house. It was like
A
more
guest
like
house, yeah.
like a bed and breakfast. So we had our own room, our own bathroom, but there was a shared. It wasn't very big. I don't know how many rooms there were, but there was a shared kitchen. So you could so for it really only for breakfast. But they had you could just make your own coffee and make your own breakfasts, and they had things to eat and drink and a fridge. So if you did want to buy stuff and store it, you could do that too. But it was shared.
Okay.
But again, it was so cheap. Like,
Yeah.
you know.
Someone anonymous asks, do people live in the high towers, or is
Yes.
it all commercial?
No, a lot of those. In fact, I would say, except downtown, many of the skyscrapers you saw are actually residential ones.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So what kind of people live in them?
And well, it varies. Some of them don't look so nice, and some of them
okay.
are brand new and gorgeous. But height has nothing to do with it. You could have like cheapo apartments with those external air conditioners and laundry hanging on the balcony 50 stories up.
So you're talking about the ones that are like the tiered apartments.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But then again, sprinkled throughout the city, there were all of these older buildings, much more similar to where we stayed, just like a 2-3 story concrete apartment building. That was a very common kind of housing. But there are office skyscrapers, but a huge number of the buildings you might have seen in the photos tonight were residential. Yeah.
Wow. And how's the air?
Humid. It's a big city. I would not say, I didn't notice any pollution that was worse than any other large city I've been in. Certainly compared to, you hear stories about going to
Beijing or something.
Beijing or Delhi. Yeah. They don't have that degree of problem by any means, but it's a big city, but it's certainly, I think the humidity was more of a problem. And of course, there's the car traffic. So there's just a lot of car fumes, which is a different kind of pollution, but it's,
But is it coastal?
Not specifically. I forget how many miles. It's not on the coast. It's near the coast. But so it certainly gets weather from the coast. But it's at least 10, 15 miles from the coastline.
Okay.
So it's not like you get coastal breezes and the way you would if you were a city like Boston that's right on the water. There are some big cities in Malaysia that are actually right on the coastline, but KL is quite a ways in.
All right. We do have a couple of other questions. I hope you don't mind.
No, happy to.
And then how tolerant are they of other religions? I guess this is in reference to the fact that they're mostly Muslim, and what was the other religion you mentioned?
Chinese religions are the other big one, but the city itself is pretty tolerant. If you were to get way out into small villages in the countryside where there isn't that mix of populations, I'm sure things would be different. But KL is a very modern, very cosmopolitan city. And like I said at the beginning, if you have never traveled to Asia, I think it would be a very good first city to go to, because I think it would be an easy one to, as a Westerner, to go there and not feel quite so overwhelmed as you might if you went to Bangkok or Hong Kong, or, well, Singapore is probably similar too. Singapore is another one where there's a huge mix of ethnicities just because of the history. Malay Muslims are the majority, but there's like easily 40% of the population is something else. So it's quite a mix. Yeah.
Like it is here, or in Canada nowadays too.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, one more relevant question to the topic tonight. were you using local currency, or what might be the exchange rate?
Oh yeah, well, this was a few years ago, so I don't
Yeah.
remember what the
Mhm.
exchange rate was. Um, it's a generally inexpensive country,
Mm.
no question. Um, the cost of accommodations, the cost of public transit is very inexpensive. Food is very inexpensive. The biggest cost would be flights getting there. Um, and oh yes, you would. Well, um, for a lot of little things, you would probably use cash, but credit cards are pretty. I mean, in a city like this, credit cards are accepted in most places. Um, I would bet even some of the like. I mean, not buying food from a street vendor, but any restaurant or stores, you probably can use credit cards. But I'm trying to remember even what the local currency was. Isn't that awful? Look
And
forward.
also, we did want to note that there looks like there's a UFO behind your head. Every time you dip your head back, there's like something that pops up. Yeah.
Oh, that's I'm actually in my dining room, so that's the lamp. You're right.
It was
Oh,
just
you're
really
right.
funny.
Oh, that
Someone,
is, yeah, no, that's the ceiling lamp. It does look like a UFO.
that's amazing. So anyway, thank you so much, Jeff.
Okay.
That was
Thanks for
amazing.
having me.
And I'll send you the recording tomorrow to approve, and then I'll send it out to the rest of the people.
Okay.
Thank you
Great.
so
Good
much,
night,
Jeff.
everyone. Thanks for
Good
coming.
night. Bye.
Bye.